Hello, everyone. Today we are in chapter 8 of the Old Testament book of Judges. There are a lot of things that are happening in this chapter, and I'm going to invite you to read the chapter yourself. I want to hit a couple of highlights and then really punch the conclusion. In the last chapter, Gideon was supposed to use 300 soldiers to defeat the Midianites. He was in the process of doing that, but then he started to recruit other cities to participate in the process. The motivation is questionable here because God didn't ask him to do that. In fact, specifically told him not to do that. As we get into this chapter, he has some conversations with one of those towns that says, hey, why didn't you call us sooner? And his answer has nothing to do with God. He ends up just talking about himself and then flowing a bunch of sugar at them to make them feel good about themselves. The next thing you read, though, is where the story gets really disturbing. He stops in a town called Succoth, and he and his 300 soldiers are in pursuit of the last two kings of Midian. And he asks the people to feed his army. Now, feeding 300 soldiers is going to be a taxing effort on the village. And so the truth is, they say, no, we'd rather see you catch those kings first. And if you do, then we'll be happy to feed you. They're testing Gideon. Now, Gideon should be okay with tests because he's been testing God in all of the last few chapters, but he doesn't take kindly to it. He goes down the road about 5 miles to another town called Peniel, asks them the same thing, gets the same answer. And in both cases, he offers them threats in return. As you keep reading, he does eventually catch those two kings. He comes back to Succoth and then puts those kings on display and says, since you didn't feed me, you are going to suffer the consequences. And he tortures the elders of that town. And then he goes down the road to Peniel and he actually tears down their city tower and kills all the men in that city. Here's the thing. Succoth and Peniel are populated by the people of Israel. It says in Joshua chapter 13 that Succoth was given to the tribe of Gad. These are brothers and sisters in God. They're Israelites. God didn't tell him to do any of this. He's killing his own people because they did not obey him, not God. Now, Gideon, as we've said a few times, is a complicated character. But as you keep reading, there comes a point where the people of Israel ask him if he will rule over them. And you do get a really good answer from him, an accurate answer. He says this at verse 23. But Gideon replied, I will not rule over you, nor will my sons. The Lord will rule over you. Now that's the right answer. Gideon is saying the right thing. But then what happens next doesn't reflect that. He ends up saying, however, I will take a whole bunch of gold from the Midianites and as my reward for having done such great work. He takes that gold and he does this at verse 27. Gideon made a sacred ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. But soon all the Israelites prostituted themselves by worshiping it, and it became a trap for Gideon and his family. An ephod is, we are introduced to that in the book of Exodus. It is a piece of liturgical wear worn by Aaron the priest while leading worship with all of the Israelites. It was a chest plate, originally made out of fine fabric with jewels embedded in it, that then hung from the shoulders and was symbolic. But in this case, Gideon makes his out of solid gold. And the whole point is that it's a piece of a garment that says, hey, I am leading you in worship. Gideon ends up wanting to be the focal point of things. And as it says, the people of Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping the ephod, and it became a trap for his family. Basically, the family wants to be the focus of the worship, as opposed to everybody focusing on God. So what's happened here so far is that while Gideon has done a great thing by freeing the people of Israel from the Midianites and allowing them to stop worshiping Baal and the Asherah pole, they're now worshiping another idol, him. Gideon ends up being self-absorbed. And while the chapter ends with it saying that they lived 40 years of peace, It doesn't say rest as it did in the other chapters. And that's because, quite frankly, their idolatry worship has just changed to an internal source. And that's the lesson I think that we all need to walk away with today. We may be called by God to do great things, but God must always get the credit. It is His sovereignty that matters. And if we make the mistake of at some point thinking that the things God is having us do are really about the things we can do, then all we're doing is shifting our idolatry from something external to something internal. We begin to worship ourselves, and that's wrong. In the movie The Devil's Advocate, the character that plays the part of the devil says at the very end that pride is his favorite of the deadly sins. We are all potentially guilty of that. And so that's the lesson for us today. As we go out into this world and share God's love, we have to make sure that our gaze, our point, our direction, our language, and our actions always point to God. And be mindful of the temptation there is to think too highly of ourselves. Humility isn't about self-loathing. It's just about keeping our gaze fixed where it belongs, and that's on God. So go out this day and worship God, love on Him, and know that He's taking you on wild adventures and you're going to get to be a part of doing great things. But God always gets the credit.
If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.